Hey, how's it going, everyone? My name is Hansi Jones. Welcome to HNH Success Podcast for business tips, inspiration, and to be a better you. So today's episode is all about the short-term gain versus the long-term effort and legacy. So what do I mean by the short-term gain? Short-term is all about that fast money because there are many ways to make money fast, whether it's online, whether it's business trends that come and go. For example, the fidget spinners in our day and age, they come and they went. This Fortnite game, just been here for a long while now, but it does soon speaks and rumors saying that Fortnite is soon going to be closed down. That made a lot of sales versus someone who's actually invested in the property, or even someone who's actually investing into stocks and shares over the longevity of time. So now we're speaking about people that do things for the short term versus those who actually learning skills for the long term. So let me give you a perfect example. We talk about someone who's into, stocks and shares or investments or even trading. Trading is a thing where you can make some good short term money, but if you trade and especially if you're a day trader, yeah, you can make some money fast, but you can also lose money very quickly. Versus someone who actually buys shares in the company that can see it growing. And we're talking about buying shares in a big company. And we're talking about, buying shares in something like Uber, something like Apple. If you invested in those at the very beginning, you would have been a millionaire by now, or even possibly a billionaire, so to speak. So, we're talking about not seeing anything maybe 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 4 years, or even 5 years, but we're talking 6 years, 7 years, 8 years, and 9 years down the line when the investment you've done is going to start to flourish versus the short term, first the 1 month, 2 month, or even the year. Now, when it comes to long term investments and obviously leaving a legacy, we're talking about really building your skill set. And more importantly, we'll talk about doing things on a consistent basis, building those habits over time with sufficient behaviors such as listening to inspirational thoughts, being positive, always learning your skills and your craft for whatever industry you're looking to go into. And even if you're a competitor, for example, you're new into the market, the way you're going to outwit your competitor is by working harder, being smarter and doing things on a consistent basis, making small choices. The big one at the moment is social media. If you're posting, content daily in all different platforms, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube videos, even things like TikTok, Instagram feeds, stories, all these different social media outlets, Twitter, you know, you're going to be ahead of the game and you're going to build your brand and be much more into the competitive market space versus someone who just concentrates on Facebook and LinkedIn. Really engaging with your potential clientele or even other competitors or even smaller ones making collaborations, which I just spoke about. But that's only going to happen with small efforts of actually posting, creating content, listening to podcasts, going to courses, going to seminars. That's the long-term gain, really building your skill set and having those behaviors that's going to change everything rather than doing nothing, accepting that you're not as big as the competitor, because any person or any business or anyone can be anything they want to be if they just put their mind to it. And I do believe you can be a market leader or take a good market share of a market with the right strategy and the right skill set. Just like in the online space for mobile phones, Apple was the number one thing, iPhones. But as time went on now, Android actually got their market share, and we're looking at the Samsungs, and now we're looking at our Huawei's that's actually taking over Apple. And I believe the Android, and more specifically the Huawei market and phones and accessories, are actually overtaking Apple. So that's what we talk about the long term game, because our Huawei's been away for quite a while, but it's only recently now they started to be much more visible in the marketplace because they're Android. And obviously, as we know with Apple, their products are always changing with every model phone, whereas Android is much more adaptable. So it's all about thinking smart and not just squeezing money from the consumer, which is obviously what you want to do to make a profit. But at the end of the day, you need to make it worthwhile for the consumer for them to stick with you. Because there may be a time whereas they don't want Apple no more, or they might not like that model, and they can't use the same accessories they have for one phone for another phone. Therefore, it's not transferable. So therefore, what do you do? So to come to my conclusion of the short to long term game, it's all about the long term. Do things for the long term. It's great to make money short term, and if we're speaking about wealth now, that's a whole different conversation when we're speaking about wealth. But when we speak about wealth generally, we are talking about the long term game. We are talking about making sure that your grandchildren have some income, have some assets to go back to. And I'm definitely going to do a podcast regarding assets and liability. But yeah, I just to speak, you talk about short term versus the long term gain, and I'm all for the long term game. It's all about building something at a slow, consistent rate over time, rather than working at a fast speed. I'm a big believer that slow and steady really does win the race. But in some instances, success does love speed in certain ways, depending, if you're in it for the short term or the long term. Because, to make 1 million overnight, you've had to make, in order for someone to make 1 million overnight, they've had to learn how to make 1 million. And not necessarily to make 1 million, that takes a lot of effort to get to. And that doesn't happen overnight if you have a limited skill set. Even if you inherited, many wealthy people, when they have children or even their siblings, for example, they've actually made good income and they set their children up. Their children don't always live up to that standard or even fulfill what their parents have done or what they've been given to them, just because they haven't been given the skill sets and they've refused or just take it for granted. So skill set and education is very important. So I highly recommend reading, something positive, instructional, 10 pages a day, and listening to something, 10 to 50 minutes daily, whether it's my podcast, whether it's a mentor or coach in your business or anything, just making sure you listen to something positive or reading something positive as well, daily and at night, just to keep your mind in the right mindset. Because if I'm honest, even myself doing these podcasts here, sometimes I get down, but you know what? It's how you handle that situation to overcome it that's going to push me forward. And so far so good. I've been very consistent with these podcasts and keep listening. I will get to my mark of 100. I'm in it for the long term. I'm doing this for the long term. Monday to Friday, I'm in it for the long term gain, because I want to serve the people in my marketplace and help those that need to be helped. So with that being said, thank you for listening to today's podcast.